So this is going to be the first example of a video-based class in which I'll walk you through some pieces of data and some skills for that week that will ultimately lead into an independent homework assignment. Before each class, I'll review the data. This week is really simple. You'll get this from me, but it's literally going to be one CSV comma separated value that says business data, and then anything else we're actually going to download ourselves. So today's class is really going to act as sort of two parts. It's an introduction to a key data source that we'll regularly use this semester. You'll sort of notice that as we learn different skills throughout the semester, we will also learn different data sources, and thus, sort of both build our knowledge on how to manipulate data, but also more importantly, where to find it. And the other thing that we'll do today is get our sort of crash course on some basic Excel, because it's a platform we'll return to somewhat regularly throughout the semester, at minimum, just to sort of help us clean and organize data before we bring it into ArcGIS. So, but before we do anything, you'll notice I'm in ArcPro here. This isn't for you to do. If you want the data I'm about to show you here, let me know and I'll send it to you. But I want to introduce some concepts to you that might be foreign, but that are going to have relevancy as we move throughout the semester. So today's data source is primarily going to be the Census Bureau. And the census is a data resource that comes in two main data sets. And each of these I'll talk about in greater detail later in the video. But there's the Decennial Census that comes once every 10 years and is the basic true count of population. We use that to get a handle on our primary demographics as a country, and then more importantly to reallocate our congressional district boundaries as well as federal and state aid for certain programs. That happens every 10 years. Every year, there's something called the American Community Survey, which is a little bit more detailed, but isn't a true count of the population. And I'll review those again in sort of a couple minutes. But we'll notice when we access our data from the census that they use their own defined boundaries. And all of us may be familiar with cities or counties or zip codes, but there's a couple of boundaries that the census uses that you may never have heard of, and these are the main three. The smallest unit of measurement for the census is a block, and pretty literally when you're in an urban environment, it is just that, a block. And we do measurements at a block level because I can't say, this many people live at X address and they are this sort of race and ethnicity, but I can summarize it up at a block level. When you group a bunch of blocks together, you get block groups, right? So a group of blocks is a block group, easy enough. When you group together a bunch of block groups, you get a census tract. And hopefully you could see with the color differentiation there how all of these things roll up into one another. Now this is probably the most common one you'll see, census tract or block group. These are going to be used when we need to understand population at more of a neighborhood or even sort of a block or a district level. But today when we go to the census, we'll largely be sort of doing larger geographies, and then as we move into successive weeks, we'll start playing around more with these sort of smaller unit geographies. So in order today, what you're going to do is you're going to head to American Fact Finder is what I want you to Google. And it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. And you'll come to Advanced Search and do Show Me All. So American Fact Finder is sort of the best portal to ultimately help us assess census data. Now, looks complicated at first, but it'll become easier as we use it in subsequent weeks. And as you get started, almost just think of like this: topics and geographies is all you really need to focus on. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff down here. Topics is effectively what I want to understand. We're going to go to that next. and geographies is where I want to understand it. Now, I find name to be sort of the better way to start. This tells you effectively all the different data types you can download data for, and some are going to be very obvious to us: a nation, a state, a county, a school district, a congressional district, a city or a town, census tract, block group, block. We'll have uses for these as we go throughout the semester. The one I want you to pick here is what's called a metro or micro area. So a metro or micro area is another sort of measurement you might not know at geography, but that we'll return to regularly throughout the semester. Think of this almost as sort of like a working cluster. So this would be effectively a Philadelphia. We're the primary city in our metro area. This is a defined measurement of basically our commuter zones, right? Anybody who's sort of coming to work here and we're going to work there, the majority of the populations. And so I think for Philly, it includes us and I think our immediate 9 surrounding counties in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. So anytime you want a geography, I want you to click. So let's click on all metropolitan and micropolitan areas and hit add. And this would be the same for any sort of unit of geography that we do moving forward in the future. And there you go, right? Now it's telling me anything I download is going to download for this area. So now we can go up to topics. So I want to give you sort of a quick thing. Before we go to population and housing, which is where we'll spend the most of the time, I want you to come to 2 things. I want you first to come to product type. I want you to go to program. I think I screwed up again. Now there we go, perfect. So these are those 2 points I'll be mentioning. Now we may pop into the economic census or the business patterns at some point, but really the 2 that matter to you are here: American Community Survey and Decennial Census. As I hinted at earlier, the Decennial Census happens every 10 years, and it is a true count of every person in the United States. I'm going to repeat that, not to get political, but it is person. You have often heard a big hullabaloo made recently that this should be used as a way to count immigrant populations versus citizens as part of the nefarious agenda of the person who is currently presiding in the presidency, but it was constitutionally mandated to be a count of all persons, regardless of whether they are citizens or not. And that is what this attempts to do, the Decennial Census, to give a true count in every city, in every state, in every county of how many people are here. The Decennial Census is the most accurate, but it also only has a certain subset of information. So it may track population and race, age, ethnicity, housing, but it doesn't really get into nuances like income or educational attainment or enrollment in school or how you commute to work. That kind of information, that more detailed stuff, is tracked in the American Community Survey. Now, this is, as it sounds, a survey. It is something that happens once every year, and then it is just, if there's 100 people, it samples 20, and it derives conclusions from those 20. And such, it is better used when calculating ratios and percentages than it is in trying to show true numbers. So let's come on up to people, and we're going to do sort of a common one to start under origins. And we're going to go to Hispanic or Latino. And the reason I'm picking Hispanic or Latino here is this concept of race versus ethnicity that we talked about in classes is an important one. Hispanic and Latino is actually not a race. You can be black Hispanic or white Hispanic or non-Hispanic white. And so it's important to sort of show this trend that we download the data together. So we're ultimately going to go to this one, Hispanic or Latino origin by race. And I just want you to see sort of 2 things here. So there's the ACS 5-year and the 1-year. This requires a bit of explanation. So the ACS 1-year will only show up for bigger geographies when you're actually saying there's enough of a sample size in this metro that I can only need to use sort of 1 year's data to get a good confidence interval. But smaller geographies, you'll see when we start downloading like census tracts, they might not have a sufficient population for just 1 year, so they use what's called a 5-year data set, which is just as you'd imagine, data averaged from 2017, 16, 15 14 and 13. And so what this does is when you're looking at these sort of smaller area geographies, it sometimes leads to more staggered data. So if you're pretty confident a trend is taking over a neighborhood, you might not fully see it until a couple of years after in sort of the granular census data. So that's just something to keep in mind. But since we can do it now, let's pick 1 year. And now we can hit download. And this is the file it's going to download. It'll say okay, let it do its thing. Boom. There you go. Now I'm going to jump to the folder and I'm going to see we get a couple things that come with it. Metadata, that sort of explains the data. And this is always going to be the file when you download from the census. Totally looks like gibberish, right? But really what it's saying is American Community Survey 2017 1-year data set, and then B03002 is sort of the code for that table we downloaded, which is race and ethnicity by Hispanic origin, or sorry, race by Hispanic origin. So I'm going to open that, and this will be sort of where I pause our first video. Our next step is we're actually going to come in here. We're going to learn to play with Excel to clean this data up a bit and actually run some calculations to calculate what I would call a diversity index, which will tell us for each of these metropolitan areas the percent chance overall that you would encounter two people of a different race or ethnicity class.